All these signs of respect from the host would indicate to the listening townspeople that this rabbi was deeply honored and worth listening to. But that was not the reception given to Jesus. And then came the scandalous action of this unnamed woman. She is identified by Luke as a sinful woman, which was his code word for prostitute. By definition, this woman was outside the pale of the religious community and so deemed outside of God's covenantal love. She was certainly not welcome in the local church. She was someone who was used and abused because she was despised. As she moved into the courtyard and stopped behind Jesus, you can imagine everyone's eyes upon her, wondering what on earth she was doing there. And kneeling at Jesus' feet, sobbing tears of joy and relief, so much that the tears ran like a river over his feet and cleansed them. She unloosed her hair and dried those feet. Then she took an alabaster jar of ointment, probably her most precious possession, broke it open and anointed his feet, and kissed his feet, an act of deepest gratitude. The shock of her actions would have stopped all conversation, but Jesus continued to speak to his host, Simon. In good rabbinic style, Jesus asked him a question, a riddle. And upon confirming that Simon had answered correctly, Jesus addressed the situation posed by the woman and taught Simon and the listening townspeople about forgiveness, about its power to heal, its power to release from bitterness and hatred, its power to create love in the hardest and most cynical hearts. For true forgiveness, given with no strings attached, with no recriminations brought up time and again, softens the human heart and soul. It frees us to love again. True forgiveness enables and indeed compels us to change us in response to the love and gratitude that we have been shown. Forgiveness heals broken hearts and broken relationships. But the secret that Jesus knew, and what he wants us to know, is that forgiveness is a two-way street. The one who has been wronged needs to be able to give forgiveness freely and completely. And the one being forgiven needs to accept forgiveness freely and completely. In doing this, there is an acknowledgement of guilt, which identifies the need to make a change. So when we are forgiven, we automatically, and accept it, we automatically know that we have done something that we need to somehow make amends for, and that usually requires a change from us. Without both the giving and receiving of this great gift, the wall between the two remains, whether it is between two people, between two nations, or between a person and God. Simon, the pious religious person of his day, had difficulty recognizing his need for forgiveness because he saw himself as good. He was, after all, a Pharisee, that class of people in the ancient Hebrew world who kept the law most completely. And by strictly obeying the covenant law, he felt he was right in the eyes of God. And this made him blind to his own sin. His judgmental, hard-hearted had no compassion for others. On the other hand, the woman knew her sin all too well. The whole community reminded her of it every day. She was shameful, and no honorable woman or man would have spoken to her or even acknowledged her existence. Her burden of guilt was compounded by ostracism and shame. The forgiveness Jesus extended to her woke her up to her true worth in the eyes of her loving God. And that empowered her to change. That was Jesus' gift, to extend the loving forgiveness of God to those who were totally bereft of love. Think of Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus, the tax collector, the wee little man that we all sing about in Sunday school, who brought people right and left, and then gave back 4 times what he had brought people off. Or think of the Samaritan woman at the well, the woman with 5 husbands who was out there in the heat of the noonday sun, another woman who was probably ostracized in her community. Or think of Matthew, the tax collector, who became an apostle. Tax collectors automatically were out of the pale because they were considered those who collaborated with the Romans, with Gentiles, and those who brought people. It took too many taxes. All of these people were radically changed by their encounter with Jesus. Jesus knew that his loving forgiveness brought hope and freedom to those who were outside the pale, and that enabled them to start to change. But that same forgiveness was challenged and scorned by the good, upright, righteous people of the day, like Simon. They were too secure in their own goodness to heed his message. Their own ability to keep the law tied them to obedience to the law, which by their standards made them right with God. They believed there was nothing in them God needed to forgive, and so they remained locked within their own rules and regulations, missing God's loving gift that was extended to them. Forgiveness is a powerful act of love that is centered in both the heart and the will. It does not belittle or ignore the wrong that's perpetrated, but it is willing to accept into the heart and soul the wrong done and then move on. Forgiveness is a willingness to restore a relationship to wholeness out of love for the one who has harmed us. And the one being forgiven needs to acknowledge their wrong, that otherwise they cannot receive the healing and love for which this forgiveness stands. So back to the question from our useful student. Can everyone be forgiven by God? Yes. Can everyone receive God's forgiveness? No. And surprisingly, it's not always the murderers and the abusers who are able to accept the forgiveness of God. In fact, it may be us, the good church-going people of our day, who, like Simon, think of ourselves as good. We may not recognize those attitudes of mind and heart that need to be forgiven and changed. But God, out of his great love for us, brings into our consciousness our attitudes and actions which damage and diminish ourselves and others, so that we in turn can ask forgiveness. And God, who calls each one of us by name, who loves each one of us with a depth and a passion that we cannot imagine, transforms us by his forgiveness into the image of Christ, renewing and recreating us to live in freedom as new, redeemed people, free of the burdens that we carry that are associated with whatever sin we might be struggling with. God clothes us with Christ, as Paul wrote. By this transformation, God empowers us to love ourselves, our family,